Hey guys, go ahead and take out your Do Now, flip it over, and we're going to take some quick notes today. Yesterday we started talking about the election of 1800 and how President Jefferson becomes president, Aaron Burr gets second place, becomes vice president, Hamilton and Burr fought it out, have a duel, but we're focusing on President Jefferson being president. During his presidency, a few big important things happened, but the most important thing that I want you to focus on is the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. So yesterday we talked about how France and Great Britain are fighting it out, and France is like pretty poor at the moment because they just spent a whole bunch of money on all these wars, and they need some quick money. So what they decided to do is sell the Louisiana Purchase, which is this red land right here, to the United States for a total of $15 million, which is obviously quite a bit, but really if you break it down, it's like 3 cents an acre, which is not very much, right? 3 pennies an acre. And if you think in your head how much an acre is, my house is on like 1/3 of an acre. So, and I have a fairly big backyard. So if you break it down and like have an average size house and an average size yard, that's probably 1/4 of an acre. So 4 houses with their yards put together would be 1 acre, and that costs 3 pennies. Yes.
So wouldn't that be like 5 million acres?
Somebody do the math, break it down.
$15
million
is 5, and then just add on the
Just
million.
add 3 cents times 333.
15 million, so
I don't know
15
how long that would
euros.
take. How long that would take. That's
all
it.
you'd have to do is do 15 million divided by 0.03, right?
If we had
530 million?
Yeah.
Yeah.
530 million acres?
Yep.
Okay, there you go. That's a lot of acres. And it was a total of 13 states. So we have just more than doubled the size of the United States because this is pretty big. However, what it does by President Jefferson, number one, really struggled with the decision because he was an anti-federalist, which meant that he believed in states' rights. He didn't want a super strong central government. And he felt like in the Constitution, there was nowhere that said that he had permission to go and like double the land of the United States and make this big of a purchase. But also, he was kind of going against his own beliefs because he just made the presidency more powerful by saying, "Yep, I think I can purchase all this land and double the size of the United States."
Well, that means like the presidency is gonna like double in like size too.
He's given himself more power, yeah, and he kind of struggled with that decision.
Well, probably. Well, I don't think he wants more power really.
Another thing that happened is by purchasing all this land, it devalues the price of this land. Because you've got to think, you have more land, it's not going to cost quite as much. So if I were to bring in 10 pizzas in here, you all would have enough pizza for the whole class, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if I was going to charge you for it, I wouldn't have to charge you that much. If I only had 1 pizza in here, I could increase the price of the pizza per slice, right? So he just bought all of this land, and that devalued the price of the land over here, including his own property. So Thomas Jefferson actually ends up dying super poor because he devalued the price of his own land.
What does that mean?
By making it's not going to cost as much because there's more land total.
Oh, okay. So like the more land there is, the less value it's gonna be in the future.
Yep.
Okay.
So he ends up dying really poor. All right. Another thing that happened during President Jefferson's presidency is after the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, he sends 2 men to go and like basically check it out and be like, okay, we just spent $15 million on this. Let's like go look and see what it's like. So he sends Meriwether Lewis and Clark over to the Louisiana Territory, and their goal is to search for a water route to the Pacific, or at least a good way to get to the Pacific Ocean. And what they do is they log their journeys in their diary or journal, and they write down all of the plants that they see, all of the animals that they see. They have pictures of the Native Americans that they meet.
Like they have pictures.
They wrote it. They drew it. They sketched it.
I'm like they didn't have cameras.
No, they just sketched it all in their notebook. And this is about 200 years ago. And I know it feels like a super long time, but how many of you know somebody that's in like their 80s? Okay.
So it's like 77.
Okay. Does anybody know anybody in their 90s? Okay.
I don't
If
know.
you know somebody in their like 80s or 90s, then let's just imagine that they knew somebody that lived to their 80s or 90s. That means that person could have known somebody who knew somebody during this time period.
Knew somebody who knew somebody.
Isn't that, I mean, it doesn't feel like it's that long ago when you think of it like that, you know? So anyway, they actually bring back lots of gifts for Thomas Jefferson to show him what life was like what life is like in the West. And if you look at Thomas Jefferson's home, I will show you. Thomas Jefferson's home has tons of the artifacts from Lewis and Clark on the walls there. It's not sorry. Here we go. So like, and Jefferson designed this whole wall right here, and then even these skins right here. Those are things that Lewis and Clark brought back to Jefferson to be like, look at all the cool things
How
we
do they
found
fit all that
in the
there?
West. They've carried wagons. And
Oh,
so this
wagons.
is like Native American artifacts, and then like skins from animals. They brought tons of stuff back with them to show Thomas Jefferson. And you can still go see all that in Monticello. All right. The next president is James Madison, and James Madison is actually like best buds with Thomas Jefferson, so much that in Thomas Jefferson's home there's this room, and Jefferson's kids and family called it Mr. Madison's room because he spent like all this time there, and they actually lived super close to each other, but he would just like come basically hang out with him for a while. James Madison's wife is Dolly Madison, and we're going to talk a little bit about her because she's like the queen of parties and she's super amazing. During James Madison's presidency, there's the War of 1812, which the British come to America and they're fighting. They try to burn down the White House and literally set the White House on fire. And if you were to go to the White House now, I've seen it, you can still see the smoke marks where the British set the White House on fire in the War of 1812.
I hope the thing's still there.
What?
I hope the White House is still there.
It was still there, yeah. So during that time, everybody has to evacuate the White House. And Dolly Madison actually sees this portrait of George Washington on the wall. And as they're like fleeing, she's like, no, we can't leave here without this portrait of George Washington. And like, she has somebody go and tear this portrait off the wall and save it and take it with them as they flee the White House and get out of there. But that portrait is still in the White House, and she's the one who's credited with saving it, because if she didn't save it, then the British would have definitely like destroyed it. So they actually fled down the street. They actually stayed in what is now the Mexican Embassy in DC. And James Madison goes to his wife Dolly, and he's like, hey, Dolly, the British have just destroyed Washington, D.C. We really need to get out of here. We're going to have to move the capital to like Philadelphia or somewhere because we can't stay here. And Dolly's like, no, babe. If we do that, then that means that the British have won. We can't do that. We need to do something else, and we need to raise money in order to rebuild Washington, D.C. He's like, I don't know. What do you have in mind? And she's like, well, you know what I'm really good at? Throwing parties. And so they literally like throw all of these parties to raise money to rebuild Washington, D.C. And it worked. They never moved the capital. They stayed in D.C. and just threw like night after night of party until they like raised enough money to fix Washington, D.C.
How much
I don't
money
know.
did they use in order to get all the
I
stuff?
don't know. But I think that's
For
super
the
fun. And
parties.
they're like, James Madison's like, we need to leave. And Dolly's like, or we could throw a party.
The party's like her national go-to.
Yeah, that's her go-to. All right. So another thing that happens during the War of 1812 is there's fighting also between the British down south, and Andrew Jackson gets noticed during this war. So if you ever heard the song, in 1814 took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi.
No.
That is talking about the War of 1812 and how Colonel Andrew Jackson, and we'll talk about him on the next slide, gets noticed as this big time war general or war colonel. And he was actually, we'll get to him more, but he was a really common man, but this war is what totally made a name for himself. Okay. Also, the United States is expanding. As the United States expands, the legislators in the U.S. legislative branch have to figure out a way to handle the problem and issue of slavery without it tearing the nation apart. Which, spoiler alert, it will eventually do, but they're trying to keep the peace for a while. The thing that they come up with is dividing the United States at the 3630 line and having Missouri and all states south of Missouri become a slave state, all states south of this line become a slave state, while all states north of that line will become a free state. And states will join in unison with each other as like sister states. So if a slave state joins the United States, like Missouri, then a sister state, free state, will have to join as well. So Missouri and Maine are sister states. Arkansas' sister state is Michigan. So when Arkansas joined the Union, then so did Michigan as a free state. Andrew Jackson becomes president. His election is really, really complicated, a lot like the one we talked about yesterday. He is actually a very common dude, did not come from a really rich family, came from an average family. He became popular, like I said, because he was colonel during the War of 1812. His election, though, is full of people being really, really mean to each other. And they were also being very mean to President Jackson's wife. They accused him of all of this stuff, and then his wife actually passed away right after he got elected president. And Jackson blamed the election and how mean people were being to him and his wife. Like, that's what he blamed his wife's death on, because he thought it was the stress of it that hurt her. He makes the president. Before I get into this part, let's talk about some cool things about Jackson. Like I said, he was a common dude, so he wanted to really support the common people in Washington, D.C. So he would always invite regular people to come into the White House and tell him how they were feeling. He also is known for having a big block of cheese in the White House.
Why?
Literally a big block of cheese, and everybody would like be able to come in and like eat off of this big block of cheese, which actually sounds like a mix of good and disgusting.
I like cheese.
I love cheese, but a giant block of stinky cheese in the White House.
Oh, if it's good cheese,
so
then I like it. I would like it.
But he was just a very average dude who wanted to hear from how all of the people were feeling. Now, not every person has a spotless reputation and is all wonderful, because other things that happened with Andrew Jackson are the Indian Removal Act. He wanted to push Native Americans out of their homelands in Florida and the South, Arkansas, out of the homelands into Indian territory. And he made this executive order. The Supreme Court actually decided that this executive order was unconstitutional. They said no, not happening. President Jackson, when he heard the decision of the Supreme Court, said, well, they've made their decision, now let them enforce it. And he just goes on anyway and orders for a military removal of all of the Native Americans from their homes into Indian territory. So by doing that, by ignoring the order of the Supreme Court, he has just made the presidency way more powerful. Okay, now moving on to Manifest Destiny. I'm going to make this slide bigger actually so you can see a better picture.
Oh, jeez.
Manifest Destiny is this belief that Americans have a God-given right to go and expand. And I'll say westward, but it's not just westward. It's this belief that it's a justification that Americans can go to the moon, can go do whatever, because God has given us the right to do that. And this kind of gets into a complicated thing, because we all have American pride, but then we have to also think about what that justification, this theory, allowed for. And if you look at this picture, you can see, what do you, somebody with raising your hand, what do you think this is? Okay.
An angel.
Oh, all right. An angel. And if you can tell, if you can look close here, what is behind her?
Trains.
Trains. Okay,
Wagons.
wagons. You've got boats over here. What is she laying down?
Wires.
Poles and wires. Okay, why?
Is it a telephone pole?
It's like a telegraph line. Okay, not probably telephone yet.
That's,
but it would
I
be
did
a
not
like-
see that in that
telegraph
picture
line.
from the post assessment.
Okay, yeah. And then notice the colors. Why the colors are significant? Why?
Because
Why?
Is it because wherever she is, there's light?
She's bringing the light. Okay.
and then when
Everywhere
people
else,
go,
when she hasn't touched, it's just pure darkness.
Okay.
they're saying the
I-
Indians are
I
darkness,
think
and when
maybe
she
the unexplored area is all gray and all that, and
Mhm.
all the
because they
colored
don't know what it
areas
is.
explored.
Okay. So this is the explored area. Also has all of this technology, and then this unexplored west over here. And if you can see close, it's hard to see, but there's also Native Americans over here.
They're
are
saying the
dark.
Native Americans are darkness. Like they're saying, oh, Native Americans are like the pests of the problem, and we're like the anti, the spray
So
stuff that
maybe-
makes it go away.
And this picture really represents this idea of manifest destiny. That Americans have a God-given right, she's obviously an angel, that is expanding west. Now, that is going to be at the expense of the people in the
Americans.
west, right?
Yeah. Don't they get into fights a lot?
Absolutely. And so this idea of manifest destiny, while this picture is really pretty to me. Is it pretty to you? I mean, it's pretty, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this idea of pain and sadness that is happening too, because they're pushing these people here away. All right. Moving on. Okay, along with Manifest Destiny, there's we start getting this push to go westward. There are tons of trails that go westward, but the big one that we talk about is the Oregon Trail, where settlers travel west. They start at Independence, Missouri, and travel all the way to Oregon County. Yesterday, we talked about how long it would take to walk from Arkansas there.
602 miles.
602 hours.
Yeah, 18.
No, actually, I thought it would have taken.
1,841.
Okay,
I thought it
1,841
was
miles.
because I thought it was 602 hours.
602 hours. So that's going to be a long time from Arkansas. It might be a little less. It would be a little less than that from Independence, Missouri, but not too much. And they would still think of all that they would have to encounter. They would go over mountains of Colorado. You would have to figure out what time of the year to leave. So if you were going westward, if you were traveling to Oregon Territory, what month would you want to leave?
Probably in a spring month.
Why?
Because it's not too cold and it's not too hot, and you're not experiencing snow or really heat or the heat or anything like that.
Okay. What month would you want to leave?
I'd probably leave in March, because then I'd get there about April. And then in April there's no harsh weather. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, and there's really not, and there's rain every so often, but
Okay.
not a lot.
But even in even in March and April in Colorado, there's still snow on the ground.
Well, probably because
Right.
it's in the is it a north country? Because in the north there's really cold, and in the south it's hot.
Yeah. So they're headed more towards the north. I think you're right. I think spring would be a good time to leave, but it
you
might
don't know when
take
you're
you a
gonna get
little
there.
longer if there's still snow up there in March and April in Colorado. We're gonna kind of look next week into some incidents like the Donner Party, when they got stuck in a few places with weather expectations that they weather problems that they did not expect.
Did they eat each other?
Yes. They did eat each other.
Yeah.
Cannibalism.
Didn't they eat
Cannibalism.
Yeah, they
They
ate
ate,
their
like,
daughter. They ate their horse and they
At
ate their
first.
daughter.
So they
First
became
they would eat their
cannibalists. Wait,
Okay, that's a whole nother thing.
Cannibalists.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about some of the problems that you would have to figure out if you were going westward. But there's a lot to think about. Number one, you're leaving your family. You are leaving this job that
They
you
say
have.
32 hours.
You're trying to travel all the way across the United States to land you've never been before. You have to decide, are you going to bring food? Are you going to bring... But if you bring food, then it's going to spoil.
Oh yeah, and you can survive weeks without food, but that like
Are you a good enough hunter?
no,
Are
because you're
you
probably not
gonna-
bringing people who
Are you
are
going to
bringing
bring books? No.
That's where
But what
waves
about
come
books
from.
that can tell you what plants are poisonous and what plants aren't poisonous?
That's why you test them first.
So you have to improvise. So you have to like. So you literally
It takes so much.
You literally
think
have to
about
taste
and
the
so much that
plant,
you're
and
risking
if you
in
die,
the
it's
West.
poisonous.
All right, let's bring it back. Okay, we're focusing now on what's happening in Tejas. Does anybody have family members that still call Texas Tejas? Okay.
Chaos.
All right.
Hey.
So the Republic of Texas, there's a transition time here. So Americans feel like this Republic of Texas belongs to America. Mexicans feel like the Republic of Texas belongs to them. Okay, all of a sudden with this movement westward, there becomes a large number of Americans. Are we listening? A large number of Americans that are moving into Tejas, the Republic of Tejas, Texas. The Alamo is like a fort. It is a fort there. And there's so many famous people that are at the Alamo during this time period. You have Davy Crockett, the one who wore the coonskin hat. And then you also have James Bowie, who designed the Bowie knife. And all of these other people that are here at the Alamo, including women and children. So what happens is the people in the Alamo can see the Mexican army coming. And they get very concerned. They quickly send out word to try to get some help, but the help doesn't come in time. And the people of the Alamo, they try to stand their ground, and they are fighting off the Mexicans that are coming in, but it is not going well. And everyone at the Alamo ends up dying. In remembrance of that, and as revenge, sort of, Sam Houston leads an army back into Texas, and we have the Mexican-American War. Texas, the Republic of Texas, ends up winning, and it becomes part of the United States. But I wanted to just touch on
Wait, so
the
David
Alamo
Crockett died?
a little bit here. Yes, at the Alamo.
Wait,
David Crockett died. James Bowie died.
so about Texas, who owned it first?
I think it was Mexico.
Mexico.
They
Well,
were
and at
like-
this time, Mexico thought they owned it, and America thought they owned it.
So they both had to literally had to fight over who won.
Okay, then you have the gold rush, and gold is discovered in Sutter's Mill, California. It very, very quickly gets out. So if you can imagine, today it would be the equivalent of people tweeting, people posting on their Instagram stories, and then sharing it all over the place.
It spread like wildfire.
Yes, everybody knew all of a sudden that there was gold that was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California in 1849. So in 1849, everybody packs their bags and they're like, man, we're going to go make it rich in California.
Yeah.
It becomes known as the San Francisco 49ers because it happens in 1849. And so the football team is named after this gold rush here in 1849.
Wait, so-
Perfect way for you to remember. All right. It doesn't just attract Americans westward, it also attracts immigrants from Asia, China. And this is the first time that any kind of immigration laws were created. And so when we think about why immigration laws were created and what was happening here in California, it becomes pretty obvious that it was because of the gold, right? I had family that went to California during this gold rush. And it is I don't know what happened, but the story goes that there were two brothers that were both in California, and they split up, and they were both gonna go grab something, like go get supplies, go get groceries, whatever, and then meet back up again. Well, they never met back up again. Like they both, somehow one of them made it to the point that they were supposed to return to, and not both of them, and who knows what happened. I mean, one of them could have gotten killed, one of them could have like struck gold and thought, I'm keeping this for myself, is what happened. But they were immigrants too. And so it's not just Chinese immigrants coming here. Like they were from all over. But the laws that were made were specifically made to prevent immigrants coming from China.
So basically, they just made immigration laws just to keep gold.
Okay. During this time, the British destroyed a U.S. ship and they took 4 American men. Americans got angry. They passed this Embargo Act. What they're saying by passing the Embargo Act is like, listen, if you're going to hurt our ships, if you're going to hurt our sources, we don't need you to trade with. So they place an embargo to prevent trade with Great Britain.
I went to the 4 men
still
that they
have that?
captured.
Oh, I'm not sure. So they passed this Embargo Act to prevent trade. But by doing that, Americans realized, well, if we're not going to be trading with Great Britain, who
need more
has
factories.
factories,
Need more factories.
we're going to have to build our own factories. And so they do. We have Eli Whitney.
Is the embargo act still active?
Eli Whitney makes interchangeable parts. So if you like think about how you can use a screwdriver to fix all these different types of things, right?
Yeah.
And like how there are screws and bolts that can go into all of these different types of machines, even though they're all the same size. Those are interchangeable parts. Okay, so he develops this idea of having interchangeable parts that you can use for multiple different machines. And by doing that, it makes it quicker and easier to fix different things. Eli Whitney also creates the cotton gin, which makes it a lot quicker to plow fields and separate the cotton, which also kind of makes the whole slavery problem come back into the picture, because it makes the need for slavery in the South less, right?
Yeah.
So it makes the issue of slavery
Not that big.
an issue again. Well, mainly just because the North is like, well, if you have access to the cotton gin, then there really is no true need for
Slaves.
as many enslaved workers. And so then the South is like, well, trying to keep the issue of slavery alive, and it becomes
A war, kind of like a, not like a war exactly, but it's not a small issue either.
it becomes a
A
conflict
conflict.
again.
And get
And
money.
so,
Make a house of yourself.
for this need for better factories, we have more factories open. You get more production. You have people that will end up moving out of their homes in rural areas into cities. Because you have cities that start getting really, really big, that you start to have overcrowding. We also, because America has all of these opportunities, a lot of immigrants will start coming to America. They're also fleeing problems. Like my family, a lot of them came from Ireland during the Irish potato famine. And then also just revolutions in Germany. There's all sorts of stuff going on. You have job shortages, crop failure, so lots of immigrants are coming to the United States. This is the time where you have people coming to Castle Garden, and then we also have people, they close Castle Garden, then they open up Ellis Island, and you have more, that's where they put the quotas on immigrants and immigration, like we talked about a couple units ago. But all of this, people moving from rural areas, people immigrating into cities to get jobs at factories, causes a lot of overcrowding. And people are not getting paid well at these factories. You have the guys that are in charge of the factories, the overseers, making pretty good money. But people that are like just working lower level jobs, they get paid like $7 to $10 a week.
That's not a lot.
No, and y'all minimum wage today is what, like
Oh,
between $8 and $10 an hour, right?
I messed
It
up.
was like
I messed
7 and
up.
8. Last time it was my turn.
Minimum wage in Arkansas.
I'm saying that per week.
Minimum wage in Arkansas is $9.25 an hour.
I was thinking about the week thing, not the.
Oh, okay. So this is $7 to $10 a week. That's about 10 cents an hour, and people are having to work around the clock. They would literally work from the time they got up in the morning until the time they went to sleep at night. They would have you wouldn't have like set time to eat. There was no like, oh, you have to have 30 minutes lunch break. So they would probably bring something and eat quickly. You also have people that will bring some of their work home. There's this picture that I've seen that we'll see a couple of units from now where there's a mom working on sewing and she also has her kids around the table sewing too. And it's not like they're sewing their own stuff, they're sewing like things for factories because they wanted to get paid more, and if they brought their work home and could like do more and get more done at home, then they would get paid more. They start building tenements, and we'll get into this in a couple units, but these tenements are not real great. You can see right now in this picture you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 8 people in that room because there's a person taking the picture, right? So conditions are not real great. And then in a couple units from now, we're going to be talking about the Gilded Age. There are some people that started from this kind of position who end up becoming the owners of factories. Like Andrew Carnegie. Here are the last notes for today. You also, during this big time of expansion, we've talked about political expansion, we've talked about westward expansion, now we're talking about industrial expansion. You have railroads that start being built that connect factories and cities. You have steam engines built by James Watt, and this steam boat that is known as the Clermont that allows us to trade so much faster and to move things downriver faster and across oceans. You also have communication. We looked in that Manifest Destiny picture about the telegraph lines that were being strewn across the United States. Telegraph is created in 1844. Then you've got to think 1849 is when we have the gold rush. And so during this time period, y'all, it is fast. Like all of a sudden our country is gone from being created to becoming this like powerhouse. And then you also have the Wild Wild West. With all of this expansion, it becomes really hard to keep control over all of it. And territories are different than the United States in that territories have a little more freedom. If you even think like Arkansas was a state, and then west of Arkansas was Oklahoma Territory. And although that's still owned by the United States, their laws are different. And the control is different than the United States. So all of this becomes very unstable. Like there's just so much of it, and there's not as many laws, and it's just unstable. Here in Fort Smith, we had Judge Parker, right? And Judge Parker, U.S. Marshals would go out into Indian Territory and bring back men and women who have committed a crime back into Fort Smith where they could hold them on trial. Because they didn't over there in Indian Territory. They had tribunals. But they would bring them back to Fort Smith and they would try them for crimes committed in the U.S. I want to show you a little video before we go that I really, really love about Tombstone, Arizona. So, y'all, the Wild Wild West is just so interesting, and I'm not obviously the best at talking about it. This is Justin Scard, and he actually travels all through the United States. But some of my favorite videos are him in Tombstone, Arizona.
I've watched that.
And this is him in a cemetery. And Tombstone, if you've ever seen the movies about Wyatt Earp, that's what this is about. But just look at some of the tombstones and it'll tell you how wild west the West was.
Man shot by Buckskin Frank Leslie. Killed, shot, killed. I can't help but notice a pattern here. Look at this headstone here. Look at this. Here lies George Johnston, hanged by mistake in 1882. He was right. We was wrong. But we strung him up, and now he's gone. If that one's not familiar to you, how about this one? Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a .44. No less, no more. I've seen copies of this in like every Halloween
So
graveyard ever.
Wait, four
Every party
slugs?
store with Western
Bullets.
themed decor has a
So
copy
apparently they were
of this head marker. I thought it would be fun.
These are their epitaphs, like you created epitaphs last week.
Tombstones here. But the more I look around, the more graves I see simply marked unknown. And the more I look at these graves and think about the fact that these were real people who came to a sudden and often very violent end, the more this gets kind of depressing. These dudes and dudettes were way more hardcore than I could ever hope to be. They lived in and settled places most people didn't even have the guts to visit. These people were tough. They were hard, and they were really good at nicknames. All right, I need to see just a couple more graves before
Okay, and like I think I forgot to tell you this. So people, while they were traveling west, sometimes they didn't make it all the way to California, and not just by like they didn't make it because their wagon didn't get there, but some of them tried finding opportunities in other places. So my dad and my brother's favorite place in the whole world is a place called Silverton, Colorado, and guess what they found there?
Silver.
What did they find?
Silver. Because that's what the city got its name.
Right. And so places like that would pop up all over the West. And Tombstone is an area where they also like just created this community. And it became very, very popular. So that's all I have today now.